Daniel Levy is one of the shrewdest businessmen you can come across, and if he puts as much time into making Tottenham a successful team again as he does making us more brand friendly, we'd be in a great position. But we aren't. A virtue-signalling, self-indulgent, money-obsessed swine who claims to be the saviour of the club but will ultimately play a pivotal part in the untimely downfall and demise of this sleeping giant unless he is saved from himself very soon. Maybe one of the most memeable men in the Premier League, Daniel Levy's often been called a tight someone who doesn't back Spurs, who's ruining the club, who should never have sacked Pochettino, who failed to back Pochettino. I can't recall the feelings of a fan under Martin Jol, or the feelings felt when Spurs got to the Champions League final under Pochettino. That's because I'm a neutral. I don't support Spurs. I'm not going to pretend like I do. However, I feel like I can offer something from an exterior perspective to help educate people about Daniel Levy's time in Spurs, which has just ticked over 20 years as chairman. Hold on to those quotes from the beginning because we're going to see how they match up with Levy's experience and if he should continue for another 20 years. Sit back and let me take you on a journey of Levy's Spurs. I would say a fun-filled journey, but I'm going to be honest, I'm going to be injecting most of the fun into this. Levy's quite a boring man. Who is Daniel Levy? Daniel Levy was born on the 8th of February 1962 in Essex, making him currently 59 years old. And he was actually a big supporter of Spurs way before he got financially involved. In fact, he was a season ticket holder. Levy was born into quite a rich family, the owners of a family business called Mr. Bright. Nothing too fancy, but a chain of retail shops mainly in Essex but across the UK. This still gave Daniel Levy some serious opportunities. He ended up going to Cambridge University, or a part of it, in the Sydney Sussex College. He graduated with a first in economics. Apparently Levy was pretty much born massively boring. How much were you involved in college life, Mr. Levy? I had a group of friends at Sydney and we used to share dinners together, but as a group, nothing more out of the ordinary than that. Still, it does make a lot of sense. As a ruthless, stern negotiator who takes absolutely no nonsense, his story does align with that. It's very much no nonsense. After a series of businesses after he graduated, Levy partnered with Joe Lewis at ENIC. A quick word on Joe Lewis, the 84-year-old makes it sound like a prospect at Burnley. The 84-year-old was also raised in and around London. It's unknown exactly when the pair started working together, but my timeline puts it in 1988. And by 1995, Levy was one of the directors at ENIC. ENIC stands for English National Investment Company, so putting money into different businesses and companies and trying to make money out of it. They struck in the late 1990s when football and TV was beginning to boom. They acquired stakes in Slavia Prague, Rangers, AEK Athens, Basel, and crucially in 2000, after a couple of failed attempts, Tottenham Hotspur. Levy was described as one of the main driving forces behind the whole acquisition. Interestingly though, he did not want to be a chairman. He wanted to take a backseat role. He hated the public eye, in fact. Yet by 2001, Levy would become chairman of Tottenham Hotspur, a role he's held since in the past 20 years. And really, that's where our journey begins. The original aims. It could be argued it's not 100% business for Levy. After all, he was a season ticket holder at the club, but he ultimately made a business decision acquiring stake in the team. He was specifically quoted by a source at trying to make the club more efficient. Interestingly, right from the start, this included plans to build a stadium. The plan was also led to spread the Spurs brand worldwide, particularly to the Far East and the USA. At the time, financial analysts were suggesting Levy had a lot of work to do, particularly if they were going to catch up to rivals Arsenal. Levy also wanted to overhaul the academy and the training ground. This all kind of ties back to one main goal that we can all understand: improving on-pitch performance. By doing that, you can attract more fans and attract better players and improve the infrastructure at the club more easily. There are echoes of Zeus here, the attempts of Levy to make Tottenham very brand friendly. But it's important to remember, Spurs were going through an awful patch. In the 10 years before Levy became chairman, they finished 10th, 15th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 14th, 11th, 10th and 12th. Truly mid-table. So how did Levy go about achieving his goals? 2001 to 2008. The first 7 years under Levy were quite rocky, I'd say. They failed to finish inside the top 4, but they definitely started to grow throughout this period. Still, Spurs and Levy were far from smooth operators. Club officials were seen negotiating with Juan de Ramos, the Spurs manager to be, while the current man, Martin Jol, was still in charge of the team. Jol felt undermined and it made his bad form go even worse. And he wasn't even the original manager to be, even though he'd been at the club 3 years. He was an assistant to Jacques Santini. No? Yeah, he left after 13 games. He reportedly fell out with the sporting director, Frank Arsenan. No again? The sporting director lasted just a season, that's why. He did go on to be an influential figure at Chelsea, though. If anything, Levy was more successful for the Premier League in this period. I didn't realise, but he was one of the big drivers behind the rule change to include 7 subs on the bench. Levy had come out and said he thought this would improve tactical creativity and even provide a path to the first team for younger players. It's worth saying too, Levy's Spurs invested really well every year. For the 2008-09 season, he ended up investing 120 million to transfers. Transfers low is of course Levy's most controversial topic. In fact, Sir Alex Ferguson once came out and said that negotiations with Levy for Dimitar Berbatov were more painful than getting his hip replacement. That's because Levy has taken on the responsibility of negotiating for transfers and he is famously ball achy in this regard. On one hand, it's good. I mean, he's basically locked Harry Kane into the club most recently, but it's kind of limited Spurs in some ways. We'll get onto that in a bit. I guess my biggest issue in this period is the lack of strategy, really. I mean, with the managers, with Martin Jol, Jacques Santini and Juan de Ramos, they'd never managed the Premier League and had limited English experience. There was also some transfers I haven't mentioned, like Andy Reid arriving as the top transfer in the season he came in, and he lasted 1 year before he left. Spurs did win a League Cup in 2008, but honestly, do you really care? Like, even Spurs fans, you crave far more now. Maybe as a fan, I can't say I don't know the enjoyment you got from that, but no Spurs fan is sitting here going, well, at least we got that League Cup about 10 years ago. Luckily, someone was about to arrive to put Spurs into the big club territory. Harry Redknapp. 2008 to 2014. The proper building blocks. Redknapp spent 4 years at Spurs from 2008 to 2012, and to me, before the script, he had a bit of a different identity in my head. I know him more for quotes like, "You can have all the computers in the world, but your eyes, they have to be the judge." There was also a story I remember, I think from Football Daily, where apparently he turned to an analyst at Tottenham and said, "You know what? Let's put your computer on the pitch and see how it does." You know, he comes across as a bit of an old school pleb. But from doing more research into him, he was actually a big proponent of video analysis and statistics, but he was also quite reliant, and maybe not reliant's the word, but he had 25 years of Premier League manager experience. You know, this is a successful guy. And he did great things for Spurs. They finished 8th, 4th, 5th and 4th in his reign. That was the best form since 1981 to 1985. Levy was also finishing one of his big aims, revolutionising the training ground and academy, which was completed in 2012. I feel like the signings in this period took a huge step up too. There was Luka Modric and Verdan Kraljuka, then Kyle Walker in 2009, Van der Vaart and in 2010, and Adebayor and Scott Parker in 2011, Moussa Dembele, Lloris, Vertonghen, Sigurdsson, Dempsey in 2012, and, well, we all know what happened in 2013, but let's put that aside for now. See, the point I'm making is there's clear progression here, and you do have to commend Levy, because if it was going wrong, Spurs fans would have said it's the chairman's fault. So you have to give him credit when things are going right. He wasn't the sporting director or the manager, but Daniel Levy was overseeing day-to-day actions at Tottenham Hotspur, and he still is today. Maybe not because Paratici is in there, whatever. Levy also organised the new stadium at this point. The project was coined in 2008, and construction would begin in 2015, one of the big aims he'd originally set out. Again, if we check our original thoughts on Levy, the fan sentiment at the moment from the guys who know Tottenham more than me, it doesn't really match up at this point, of course. Matt's comments about Levy feel a little out of place at this point because Tottenham have gone from mid-table before him to definitively top 4 battlers. In fairness, I have given little attention to the reigns of Andre Villas-Boas and Tim Sherwood, but the next man to arrive, of course, would provide the glorious for Tottenham Hotspur. 2014 to 2019, the glory years. With the new academy and training ground in full operation, the stadium beginning construction, Tottenham hired Mauricio Pochettino, and I don't need to give too much of a background to him. We all know that Spurs have enjoyed their best form under Poch. In Son, Kane, Alderweireld and other great players of this era, Spurs had the team of a top European club. Especially in Son, Levy was able to reach the fan bases he so desperately wanted to at this point 15 years ago. But this is where the fan sentiment comes in, because despite big finishes, it feels like a missed opportunity. Let's use the 18-19 season as our hilltop, our peak. Up until this point, Levy had established the new training ground. He was reaching those fan bases. He'd committed over £900 million to Spurs in transfer fees. By 2018, Spurs had finished in the top 4 3 years running and would finish there in 18-19. In fact, in 2017, Levy was announced CEO of the Year by the Football Business Awards. And in a parallel universe, Spurs win the Champions League and everyone is happy. It's all paid off. But it's not as simple as saying that Liverpool defeating them tarnished Levy's legacy and ruined the ascension of Spurs. The blame does have to be put at Levy's door to an extent. See, people would make the argument that Pochettino was underfinanced by Levy, and really he wasn't. Because in relation to Levy's spending, he was back, besides that 2018 summer when they didn't spend anything. Still, let's compare some figures. Between 2014 and 2019, Spurs had a net spend of £84 million. They had committed to over £400 million in transfer fees. And obviously, let's not remember it's as simple as Heung-min Son for £27 million. Here you go. But the next spend from 2008 to 2013 was £34.66 million, when Tottenham committed to spending over £300 million too. The spending had gone up slightly, but it feels like nothing compared to what City, Chelsea, United can and did do across the past 10 to 15 years. Levy had been fantastic to Spurs up until about this point. In comparison to the 20 years before him, Spurs finished in the top 4 5 times and finished below 6th 14 times. In the 20 years after his appointment of chairman though, Spurs have finished in the top 4 6 times and below 6th only 7 times. A clear improvement. But what I think has gone wrong, or maybe hasn't worked is for a better term, is that Levy and Spurs haven't pushed the boat out far enough. He's done brilliant at turning them into a big club, this top tier brand, reaching new fan bases, this new stadium, sustainable, efficient. But efficiency doesn't win you trophies in football. Ludicrous spending, going over the top, wins you those trophies. To guarantee success, you need to lose money. You need to be City. You need to be Real Madrid. So let's talk about how Levy has held back Tottenham. There was an interesting discussion I was reading recently about the point of decline for Tottenham. Was it when Moussa Dembele left? Was it losing the UCL final? Was it Paul Mitchell leaving Spurs and falling out with Daniel Levy? Obviously Mitchell being one of the most intelligent recruitment heads out there. Was it selling Kyle Walker? Was it holding on to aging players like Vertonghen, Eriksson? Or was it Levy not stepping up for Poch's request? Was it the spell of a lack of investment when Levy bought no one in the 2018-19 campaign? All of these issues isolated may have not hindered Spurs' progress, but in this period, 2014 to 2019, it's a giant missed opportunity. Perhaps in Levy's perspective, Spurs pushed far, they achieved new heights, but it can only feel like falling short. Had Roman Abramovich been the owner of Spurs, they most likely would have won a couple of trophies in this period, because he would have pushed the boat out, he would have made those extra signings, he would have lost the money, he would have lost efficiency. But Levy hasn't got that capability, whether that's his own fault or Enix's fault. Either way, it's never been the plan to be Roman Abramovich. It's been the plan to be efficient and turn Spurs into a great business, which takes you so far. Look at Leicester. But it doesn't guarantee you success. And I think Daniel Levy found his limit, and after Poch has left, it's all gone downhill. In Mourinho and Nuno, I can't even describe what Levy's trying to appoint. It was clear with Villas-Boas and Poch at least that they were trying to sustain some success, but Mourinho felt like a reaction to fans who just desperately craved trophies. It felt like Levy for once was turning away from the plan and saying, we'll give you this and hopefully this will work, and it didn't. And Nuno feels like filler. Now let's bring it all the way back to the comments at the start. Levy's sharp, business acumen has transformed Spurs. It's taken them from mid-table and struggles to definitively one of the biggest clubs in the world. And by biggest clubs, I'm not saying they're top 10, but they're like at least top 30. Not just in performance, which has definitely improved, but in infrastructure, in off-the-field matters, even in keeping up with Arsenal. Now, of course, that's because Arsenal suddenly became quite bad, but you do have to give credit to Levy in this aspect. These things do have to be recognised and respected. We should talk about how Levy set up the Tottenham Tribute Trust, a charity in his first year, I believe, of chairmanship, where it was dedicated to helping former players. However, I think this is as far as his investment and current methods can go. You need to overspend to guarantee success, and Levy will never do that, at least under his current mindset. And the sad thing is, he could have had his ultimate payoff. He could have got that Champions League, or maybe if he pushed the boat out, he could have got the Premier League in 15-16. So for those who say Levy is a leech, someone who's just taking money out of the club, I think you're wrong. From the perspective I have taken at least, there's clearly more to it. But to say Levy will ultimately play a pivotal part in the untimely downfall and demise of this sleeping giant unless he is saved from himself very soon is possibly quite true. The expectations have changed at Spurs. Top 4 or top 6 is no longer enough, and Levy needs to invest harder to satisfy the fans. Him and the ENIC should stop treating the club like a business and more like a plaything. If he can't do that, then personally, I think Levy's time at Spurs is up. I don't think Levy's the right man to take Spurs to greater heights. Now, let me know if you enjoyed this video and what you disagreed with. As I mentioned, I'm not a Spurs fan, so I can't exacerbate the feelings of what Spurs fans will feel, but I hope neutral sounded interesting, and let's get a discussion going on in the comments. Is Levy's time at Tottenham up, or will he change tactic? Am I completely wrong with my assessment of him, or am I completely right? Let me know, and please subscribe so I can see you next time.